Me? I'd support someone who wants a fair free market, not with minimum or maximum regulation, but with smart regulation.
Smart regulations. Smart. Wow. See, I've always held that we needed dumb regulations. I've been a real champion of dumb regulation, you know? But now, the way you put it, smart regulation sounds so much better, you know? Not too many, but not too few, right? You know, and that's the thing. The true Puka, he's broken out. He's broken out of the matrix of this false dichotomy of having tons of regulation and no regulation. He says we need to have kind of a middle ground. You know, it's appeal to the middle ground, this third way of doing it, and this just blows my mind. I mean, did you come up with this entirely by yourself, Mr. Puka? What an incisive prescription. I mean, you must be the first person to have thought of this. Ending the sarcasm. So first off, the true Puka lies about what free market advocates say. Sorry to intrude on your little fantasy bubble, Mr. Puka, where everything bad in the world is a result of too much freedom, but nobody is against regulation. The question is, what kind of regulation and by whom? Now, grown-ups understand this intuitively, and in fact, it's something so obvious that it doesn't even need to be said. But for atheist cults and for, you know, Huffington Post kind of people, this stuff has to be made explicit because otherwise, you know, you guys are bound to just make things up. And because you don't understand the other position, you assume here be dragons. For anti-statists, the question is regulation best done by a competitive, polycentric legal order or by a non-competitive, monocentric legal order? I don't want to get into defining what I mean by that or the benefits of that. I've done that lots of times in the past. That's not the point here. The point here is just to say that true Puka's lying. And people who generally support free markets but support a state, they advocate limited state intervention in economic activities. Instead of the polycentric legal order defining property norms, they want a monocentric legal order to define property norms and regulations. A limited amount. How limited? Well, that's where we get to context. What is property? What constitutes property violation? For example, pollution would be a form of property violation, and in fact was treated that way at the beginning of industrialization in Britain and in the US until the industrialists in those countries, and in Germany, until the industrialists in those countries got a hold of their respective Congresses. So by violating property rights, the Congresses granted industry the right to pollute without annual restitution. So the true Puka talks about a company with really bad working conditions and really bad work hours in China and how the workers are all protesting. In fact, a bunch of them threatened, I think 300 something, threatened to commit suicide, but he gives us no context and no numbers regarding the harm. For example, he says there are explosions and people are getting killed in explosions. And there are people who are getting neurological diseases from working with the chemicals. One must ask, how many? 1? 1,000? 1 million? How many people are getting exploded? How many people are getting palsy because they're working with chemicals? I mean, how many? What percentage of the workers suffers neurological damage? And how does this compare to other industries? And how does this compare to the mortality rate of working on a farm in rural China? Moreover, the true Puka does nothing to explain why the employees are still working there, as in what other industries could they work in and why aren't they? Because on a competitive labor market, laborers are selling their labor. I need to make this very explicit because I know you're kind of slow here. You pay a plumber to come in and fix a leak. Companies, by hiring someone to come in and solder a circuit board or whatever, pay people to perform these tasks in the same kind of way that you hire a plumber to fix a leak. The difference is that these companies purchase these tasks at bulk rates, whereas when you hire the plumber, you're only paying him one time. And so a job is nothing more than a long-term bulk rate labor trade. If Foxconn is as bad as you, the true Puka, says, then why aren't these people working elsewhere? This is a pretty obvious problem, a pretty obvious conundrum that people who aren't completely, totally retarded would immediately think of. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to help you out here, Mr. Puka, and construct a scenario of how this could have happened. Okay, so here's a scenario. Foxconn was granted a bunch of land by the Chinese government, a bunch of land that a bunch of farmers owned. Okay, and so this displaced those farmers who now have to work for the factory because their farms are gone. Then the Foxconn factories polluted the river or whatever, and rice is a highly water intensive crop, and so it polluted all those crops and made a bunch of farmland unusable because of all the pollution. And so now there is a whole bunch of people who have to work for Foxconn because Foxconn destroyed their farms, which is their alternative form of employment. Now, why do I think this is what happened? Why does this seem so plausible to me? Well, because that's what happened in Britain and in the Ruhr River Valley and in many parts in the United States during early industrialization. If this is indeed what happened regarding Foxconn, then the problem was created by property violation, first from the initial grab from the factory, and then the pollution, which constitutes a property violation. But we don't know if this is what happened because the True Puka didn't bother to explain why people are still working there, probably because he's too stupid for the simple question of why aren't they leaving to even enter his brain. Then he puts on a little quote on one of his videos. Says, yes, according to Republicans, refrigerators are luxuries. Now, this isn't germane to the main point of his video, but it's still illustrative of the vapidity of the True Puka. This statement, it's not even wrong, it's non-cognitive. First off, what Republicans say this? And in what context do they say this? Are refrigerators luxuries in rural Tibet? In Manchester? In the mountains of Peru? In the heart of the Congo? And is this a descriptive claim or a prescriptive claim? Is it saying refrigerators are a luxury or that they should be a luxury? I have no clue what the True Puka means by this little quip, and in all probability, the True Puka himself isn't even aware of how inane this statement is, and certainly all his viewers are not. But back to smart regulation, right? What does that even mean? Every single regulation was thought by somebody to be smart. Okay, I'm going to start a political party and call it the Smart Party. If you find what most people would consider to be a dumb regulation, what are you going to do when you find it? As far as I know, you offer no systematic change. You want more democracy. You want to keep democracy, and any reforms you want are in favor of expanding and making the U.S. even more democratic than it already is. The social democrat solution to all problems is for people to get involved and vote better. Even if you were totally correct about everything you said, then vote better wouldn't be an answer because people are what they are. Okay, people respond to incentives. Each person only has one vote. Your vote does not matter, and it doesn't make sense for anyone to invest time into politics unless they get some kick out of it. Here's a chart of the size of the Federal Registrar year by year. Under no president has the total number of regulations in the Federal Registrar shrunk. You know, you may have heard lots of stories about deregulating here, deregulating there, but across the board, under no president has the size of the Federal Registrar shrunk. Okay, it has been a consistent expansion in the total number of regulations, be they smart, be they dumb, whatever. Okay. In the United States, regulations primarily hurt small businesses, which create the most jobs in the U.S. Okay, not large corporations, small businesses create jobs. Large corporations have full-time legal staffs, and so compliance with labyrinthine regulations for them is easier. Okay? They have a whole staff doing it. The staff tells them what to do, and the orders come from the corporate offices, and kind of a pseudo-central plan that these corporations have can enforce their compliance to the regulations, as opposed to a guy who's just one guy with a shop. He himself has to go through all these things and figure out how to apply to his business. It's not a fair fight. And moreover, these large corporations often help to write these regulations and write it in a way that benefits them and benefits large companies. These are just a few things to consider before you breathlessly pontificate the dangers of too much freedom.